All right, so today we're going to draw an ear, and an ear has a lot of information in it. Um, so I'm not going to finish it very tight just because there's so much going on. And remember, I mean, if you're going to turn this in for assignment, you could easily spend an hour doing this. So the first thing I'm going to do, like always, is I'm going to draw guidelines, and I'm going to draw them in blue. And the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to draw this larger than life just because there's so much information. But the first line I'm going to put down is the angle of the head. So I'm drawing a person's left ear. So our face angles a little bit. Then I'm going to put a mark. This is kind of the hardest part, is deciding the height to the width. So I think, and I'm constantly going to make adjustments to it, especially if I'm not happy with it. But I think that's about the correct ratio. And I've got some pretty sharp angles here, but I'm going to go back over it with my black pencil and round things out. But that's my basic shape. So, second layer, and I'm going to switch to black. And again, I'm using my pencil, about that thick of a line. Use whatever line you're most comfortable with. And I've got high opacity. So now I'm just going to define these edges a little bit more. I'm going to round off the earlobe. Remember, there's two types of earlobes, one that hangs down and one that is fully connected. So I'm rounding that off a little bit, getting rid of some of the sharp edges. Now I'm going to draw this outside. I believe it's called the helix part of your ear. And all these forms will continually be adjusted throughout the drawing. It seems like I draw most of my shapes in an angular fashion and then go back and round them off later. Okay, so there's my basic shape. Now an ear, let me add another layer. An ear consists of the basic shapes of a question mark. So that's the question mark is the shape of the ear, and then the little dot is the earlobe, and the letter Y. That's the basic shape of an ear, is a question mark and a letter Y. All right, so now I'm going to hide my blue layer. I don't need that. Don't need my guidelines anymore. But now I'm going to slowly start to put in some values. Go back to my second layer. So there's two different shadows. There's a cast shadow and a core shadow. Remember that cast shadow has sharp edges, and a core shadow blends more. So then also remember that the cast shadow is darkest, closest to the object, and then it fades out a little bit. And the core shadow will have a lighter value on both sides of it. So this is sort of a shadow mapping stage. I'm going to put just a little bit more detail in here. So I'm just going to start putting in the darker edges of my cast shadow and my core shadow. And one thing you can do to help specify how features curve are to do a cross contour. So I'm going to do a cross contour on another layer. Maybe I'll switch the color so you can see it a little better. So a cross contour will help define the plane change. So if you can see that, that helps to show how that helix wraps around. So I obviously won't leave those in my drawing, but I'm using that as a reference to show me how those objects turn. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my layer where I'm shading. Okay, now I'm going to start to do, switch to my black. I'm going to work on, this isn't so much a cast shadow, but a core shadow. Oh, and my light source is, on this picture, is going to be at the top and just slightly to the left. So I'm going to get a highlight on top of this part of the helix. Anything that's standing out is going to get, is where my highlights are going to be. And I'm going to wait and put in my highlights at the very end, which I usually do. And I might even enlarge this. Since there's so much information, I'm going to enlarge it so it's a little easier to work on. So this will be my highlight when at the very end, but the edges of my core shadow are going to be a little darker. And I'm going to do that all the way around my picture. Okay, so now I'm going to fill in a cast shadow in the deepest part of the ear. It's not going to get as nearly as much light as the rest of the ear. And that's going to be about the darkest part of my drawing. And then I'm going to do like about a 50% or 60% halftone. So this is a cast shadow from this part of the ear. I'm just going to throw a halftone in there. And more of a halftone on the outside edge of this helix, or that outside edge of your ear. Darken some of my shadows even more. So I want a pretty good contrast. Round these forms off a little bit. So they're not so angular. Remember, if I was doing this for an assignment, I'd spend quite a bit more time being consistent with my shading, cleaning up random marks. Okay, and if it helps you to connect the ear to the side of the head and put in a little more value where it connects to the neck and maybe some shadows behind the ear, if that helps you, go ahead. If it seems distracting, then go ahead and leave that out. You could put in a few strands of hair, maybe right there, wisp of hair. Sometimes it adds to see where the feature is at, the surrounding area. Gives a little bit more contrast to the whole picture. So far I've got the basic shape shadows mapped out. Now I'm going to go over it and put in my mid-range, my mid-values, my half-tones over most of the ear. I feel pretty good with the shadow massing that I have so far. It will always continue to be adjusted throughout the whole drawing. And then at the very end, I'll knock out the highlights. Okay, so now I'm going to come in and lay in the mid-tone value on the rest of the ear. There will be very few bright white highlights. There will be some on the earlobe and then some on the top of the ear. I need to define this curve right here a little bit more though before I go much further. And remember, the cross contour lines would be like this, and then on this part of the ear, the anti-helix, they would also curve like that. So putting in those helps me to define or remember the shape of that. So I'll do a little bit of a coarse shadow on both sides of that to help give it a turn. Remember, the key to any drawing or painting is making a two-dimensional drawing look three-dimensional. If you can master that, you got it figured out. Now, in an actual portrait drawing, I don't put nearly this kind of detail in an ear, because in any drawing, wherever you have the most detail is where the viewer's eye is going to go, and I don't want the emphasis to be on the ear. I want it to be on the eyes or the mouth. So I won't put near this amount of detail into my portrait drawing. And this is obviously a side view, and usually a portrait is a front view or a quarter turn view, so you wouldn't see this much of the eye anyway. Then I'm going to spend the last few minutes doing some touch-up, making my darks a little bit darker, putting in my highlights, smoothing all of my blending. And I'm not going to do this on this picture because I could easily spend another half an hour at least getting everything the way that I wanted. I've got to put in my core shadow along this top edge because I want to show that curve. So to show that curve, this area is going to be dark, this area is going to be dark, and the middle will be the highlight where the light's shining. Okay, now I'm going to put in some of my highlights, and again you can either erase your highlights or use the white color on your drawing pencil. Try erasing and see what I. So be careful you don't get too many highlights in there, or you'll lose a lot of the core shadow. And another way to make a highlight stand out is to darken around the highlight. I'll make that highlight stand out just a little bit more. Okay, so this is a pretty rough ear, but I think I'm pretty close to being done. I would spend some more time smoothing out a lot of these shadows, but I think I've got the shape that I'm after. I still have too light of a midtone. Everything needs to be darkened up just a little bit. So that's about as far as I'm going to go. Thank you.